Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, a managed DNS provider was taken offline. Yeah, you heard about Dine's big DDoS. We'll break it all down and tell you what happened. Then we'll beat the dead dirty cow, answer your great questions, and cover some breaking news in our roundup on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi, everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 290 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly Systems Network and Administration podcast. We stream this episode live on Thursday, October 27th, 2016. This episode is brought to you by our three fine sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IX Systems. I'll tell you more about those great sponsors as this here show goes on. Our live stream, I'm really glad you asked. It's powered by ScaleEngine. All of our downloads and live streams are powered by ScaleEngine.com. Go check that out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week for 290 weeks is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hello, Alan.
Hello, Chris, everybody. Thanks
Hello.
for watching.
Okay. All right. You know I want to see the shirt. You know it. It's got, yeah. I can see. I'm not arguing. I'm just explaining why I'm right. Yeah. Okay. That's a nice one, Alan. I like that. That fits you, too.
Yes. My mother got it for me for my birthday.
I think she tuned in. I think she knows how this goes. So this week is a big week. There's so much to cover. Everybody knows about the massive DDoS attacks, Dirty Cow, and other things that are going, plus great emails and a huge roundup. And the only other guy on the internet probably working harder than us this week is Mr. Brian Krebs. You ready to jump into some of this stuff?
Yep.
This is a big one.
Yes. There was a giant DDoS attack on Dyn. If you're not familiar with Dyn, or maybe didn't realize, they renamed themselves. Originally, they were called DynDNS.com, right? And if you were around the internet 15 or so years ago, when everybody had dynamic IP addresses but ran little home servers anyway, everybody had, some silly name .dyndns.org or one of the other 100 or so domains
Heck
they
yeah,
had.
I still do.
Yes, I know. Dan still has, his is like dan.unixathome.net or something like that.
Yeah, they used to have a bunch of great, crazy domains you could pick from too. And
yeah, so they had a bunch of those. But over the years, their DNS infrastructure got bigger, and eventually they started offering domain registration, but also DNS hosting for other stuff.
And they wanted to make more money, I'm sure.
Yeah, so they would host. So you could use the Dyn DNS service with your own custom domain, so that you could have alanjude.com or whatever hosted with them, and still use the Dyn DNS service and client with it.
Yeah.
So that you could have your modem dial, so you can have like home.alanjude.com or whatever to point to your home server and all that kind of stuff. And eventually they became quite a big DNS provider. I think partly because so many administrators and so on had used them at home and knew about their service. When it came time to, say, pick the company to host the DNS for Twitter, GitHub, SoundCloud, Spotify, Reddit, and a bunch of others, they all chose Dyn. So then on Friday of last week, as we had a bit of an internet snow day, as we call it.
I like that.
Criminals on Friday morning massively attacked Dyn, a company that provides core internet services for, like I said, Twitter, GitHub, SoundCloud, Spotify, Reddit, and a bunch of other sites, and hundreds of thousands of other sites, most of them smaller, but causing outages and slowness to many of Dyn's customers. Now, the biggest thing here is because it's your DNS provider, the Twitter website was up and running perfectly fine. But if you can't resolve the name www.twitter.com to the website, nothing's going to work.
Well, Hover was DDoSed, what, 3 weeks ago or so?
Yep,
and we
had
the
JB site.
Yeah, and took down the JB site because our servers were all up, but Hover's DNS wasn't resolving.
Yeah, and so people couldn't, basically DNS is kind of like the phone book for the internet, right? You can look up a name and find out what the phone number is, or in this case,
you suppose the two attacks are related?
To the Hover one? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just interesting that they're both DNS related. Probably could be, and it could absolutely not be. So, hard to say.
But in a statement, Dyn said on the morning of October 21st, they received a globally distributed denial of service attack on their DNS infrastructure, specifically targeting their servers on the East Coast, starting at around 7:10 a.m. Eastern Time, which is 11:10 a.m. UTC. They say DNS traffic resolved from East Coast name servers locations are experiencing a service interruption during this time. Updates will be posted as information becomes available. They put up on their status website. So what's interesting is the attack on Dyn came just hours after Dyn researcher Doug Mattery presented a talk on DDoS attacks at the Dallas, Texas meeting of the North American Network Operators Group, or NANOG, which is basically a user group for ISPs and people that run big networks and routers and so on.
That's coincidental timing.
Mandouri's talk, available on YouTube, delves deeper into research that he and Brian Krebs teamed up on to produce the data behind the DDoS mitigation firm has a history of hijack story that he did back in September. So Krebs teamed up with the guy from Dyn to do some research on related to the DDoS attack stuff. And shortly after that video goes up on YouTube, Dyn gets hit with a giant denial of service attack.
Could be a message. It could be related. It could also be not. But again,
when I first heard about the attack, I figured it was just a denial of service attack for the purpose of the denial of service attack or whatever. I didn't know that it had a link back to Krebs.
I had also heard, and this doesn't seem as feasible either, but I had heard that it was a response to Ecuador pulling Julian Assange's internet connection. And so it was, you're going to take his internet out, we'll take your internet out.
Targeted the east coast of the U.S.
I know, I don't understand the connection.
If you believe the Ecuador thing was at the request of the U.S. or whatever, then maybe it makes sense.
And WikiLeaks tweeted something out that kind of implied that it was their supporters running the DDoS. They tweeted out asking people to stop the attack and that they'll get internet services restored soon. But that could be, that could also just be.
Well, part of it was the hype and the fact that people were saying, oh, the internet's down and everything's broken. It's like, actually, no, it's just a couple of websites that some people consider the internet. If you ask some people's, some older people, Facebook is the whole internet.
Yeah, I didn't even notice this was going on, really. And part of it was I was offline, but
because GitHub was down, that caused me a little bit of trouble. And also Puppet.com was down. And I was trying to look up the documentation for something we were trying to do at work here. And Puppet was down, so I tried to, and then Googling around, I was like, oh, I can look at the source code for it, maybe figure out what it is since the documentation. And then GitHub was down. I was like, Yeah. It's like, GitHub and Puppet.com.
Damn it. Tools, people, not the tools.
Yeah. And so, there had been an ongoing joke for a while about FreeBSD moving its official source of truth to GitHub because that's where all the developers are. And it's like, suddenly hosting your own thing doesn't look so bad, does it?
Yeah. Noah made a lot of hay on that point during Last this week.
Yeah. That's how it goes. I was honestly surprised at the number of places that were using Dyn.
Yeah, me too.
Like GitHub has switched to Amazon now.
And it must have been like Twitter. I think even Netflix and Spotify were down.
Well, I think part of Netflix. I don't know that it was down so much as just the volume of traffic was clogging up level 3 and so on, making it very difficult to actually stream anything.
Jeez, I imagine. Yeah, I can bet. So the timing seems to be potentially related, could be coincidental with that video going up. The WikiLeaks thing's probably more of a publicity stunt than anything else, but also part of the timing. Whole thing's weird.
And then so we have a second story here from Krebs related. He says basically a follow-up saying that hacked cameras and DVRs powered the massive internet outage that we had on Friday. In particular, Ars also has an article where the Maria and the Bashlight botnets joined forces to attack Dyn. According to researchers at the security firm Flashpoint, today's attack was launched at least in part by the Maria-based botnet. Allison Nixon, director of research at Flashpoint, said at least one Maria control server issued issued an attack command to hit Dyn. Some people are theorizing that there were multiple botnets involved here. What we can say is that we've seen a Maria botnet participate in the attack. So basically, what they are saying without coming out and saying it is they have sensors they built that connect and pretend to be part of the botnet. So they have a device that pretends to be one of these hacked devices and joins the botnet so they can see what commands are being sent to the botnet.
That's clever.
it's an age-old way to take out a botnet.
It's like a hunting approach and like a new take on it, because you're going to them, though, in a sense. You're
right, but sorry. The old way of doing command and control for botnets was an IRC channel.
Yeah.
Because you could send a message and every bot would get it. So I'm very familiar with this technique of stealthily joining the channel, pretending to be the Perl bot that was installed on my web server, watching what they're doing, seeing what the commands are, and then sometimes actually issuing commands myself and telling all the bots to delete themselves.
So are you saying they've automated that? Like they have...
they have to build a custom one for each bot, because you never know what... But once you have the source code for the bot, which Mario they do, it was very easy to make something that would pretend to be it.
So they're essentially creating their own bots to be fake bots and log and record everything.
And basically see what the botnet controller is telling the bots to do.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, and then this is how they can prove that botnet was used in the attack on Dyn, is because they saw somebody giving the commands attack Dyn to the botnet. And then Dyn has an official blog post, although they don't say very much, but they're saying it's likely at this point that you've seen many news accounts of the distributed denial of services attack against Dyn sustained against our managed DNS infrastructure. We'd like to take this opportunity to add some additional detail and context regarding the attack. Although at the time of this writing, we're carefully monitoring for any additional attacks. Please note that our investigation regarding root cause continues and will be the topic of future updates. It is worth noting that we are unlikely to share all the details of the attack and our mitigation efforts in order to preserve our future defenses. This is the downside, is that they don't want to share all the detail, because it would also tell the bad guys how to work around everything they're doing.
So just so I'm clear, were they actually sending traffic to these DNS servers, or were they doing DNS amplification attacks?
They were actually attacking the servers.
Okay. So they're actually...
Otherwise, it would have been using Dyn to attack somebody.
Okay,
so... in particular, the Dyn servers are authoritative, so they don't answer requests to anybody except for their own domains, for domains they host. So then it was a sheer number of devices and bandwidth that they did this with. Okay. Yeah. And they just took them out. Then there's a follow-up link here from ThreatPost, where the Flashpoint researchers are pretty sure now, or moderately confident, that the attack was the work of some script kiddies and not politically motivated. Again, kind of going back to it's retribution for posting that video talking about denial of service attacks and working with Krebs, rather than,
Yeah, and I played about, I think it was 2 or 3 clips in last night's Unfilter, where the U.S. news media was saying that it's the Russians trying to mess with the elections. So they already saying it was, and in fact, they went to...
The fact that Twitter was affected is just coincidental to the fact that Twitter uses Dyn for their hosting.
Yeah, so they went to their logical extreme. It's the Russians affecting the election. WikiLeaks went to their logical extreme. It's a response to Assange's internet connection being disconnected. Nobody knows what's going on, but it looks like the evidence shows that it's just a bunch of script kiddies that could take down half of the U.S.'s internet.
Well, they didn't actually take out half of anything.
I know, but to end users, yeah. I agree. And in fact, it's kind of sad, and it's kind of too bad, because it's not a super sophisticated cyber hack attack like the media is calling it. It's not like this incredible feat that's been pulled off. It's overwhelming systems with traffic, which is not new and not super exciting, other than its total scale, really. So I was just looking at Inagogo in the chat room, links us to something that says that it's very few devices that were used in the attack, but it looks like other data indicates it was a lot of devices. So
so Dyn's initial post said it was tens of millions of IPs, but now it's saying it's possibly less.
Yeah. So I'm not sure where that stands.
Yeah, we'll basically have to wait for more digging into that, but we'll follow up with that on a future episode once. People have actually figured out what happened.
They say with more time to analyze the logs, Dyn reckons it's about 100,000 home web connected gadgets.
Well, I think that's all it took for the Krebs site one, right?
Yeah, that sounds right.
I don't know. But yes, it does raise a valid point. In particular, it looks like Dyn doesn't use Anycast for DNS. And so when you actually take out the US East servers, it doesn't auto-fail over, but also... I don't know. I only checked during the attack, but when I did, even my server in Germany was going to the U.S. East Coast to try to resolve stuff, which seems, weird.
Yeah. Well, it sure got a lot of attention.
Yeah. Well, in particular, traditional media did a terrible job of covering this.
Yeah.
So there's like a random news station here. It's like unprecedented cyber attack.
Yes.
Tens of millions of IP addresses used to take down Twitter and Netflix. It's like, well, actually, Twitter and Netflix didn't go down. They were up the entire time. You just, weren't able to resolve them maybe. Mm-hmm. But if they were cached, you still did. And
You should have seen some of the clips that I played of them freaking out about this hack attack. They had experts to come on to talk about the hack attack and how it all works, and it was painful listening to them.
Well, the biggest problem is that nobody can actually know exactly what's going on, even dying when they're under attack in the first couple of hours. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and of course on their first report they're trying to do attribution. They're trying to say it's the scale of it, and then there's really no follow-up. There'll be no follow-up on their part that it wasn't tens of millions. It was maybe 100,000. There'll be no follow-up on the fact that it seems like it wasn't the Russians. It was just script kiddies. It'll just be, remember that hack attack we had, and that'll be it. It'll just be and now it's just become part of what's happened in the narrative. Is there's this giant hack attack, and the fact that it's a denial of service and that these systems weren't actually down. Nobody's systems were crashed except for.
Well, in particular, I think Elroy brought up the best, a better analogy now that people don't use phone books is like the restaurants are still open, but your GPS just can't tell you how to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess so.
It's like what's the restaurant review site called? I can't remember now. Yelp. If Yelp is down, it doesn't mean the restaurants are closed.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't go out for dinner.
Yeah. 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 Yeah, I wonder too if people, what could people have done themselves to sort of couch for this? Like, would running a local DNS server have helped, assuming that the records were still valid?
If they were cached, so probably wouldn't have helped that much.
Okay. What about if Twitter was running their own DNS, for example?
Well, it might have it would have isolated. Twitter wouldn't have experienced the problems if they weren't using Dyn when they were attacked, although...
Somebody just go after their DNS specifically.
Yes, yeah. Twitter's DNS would probably be smaller infrastructure if it was just for Twitter, and would have resulted in them being easier to take out a bunch of other times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it really raises the question of, I think it's a server Easy DNS offers, where if you register your domain with them, they can automatically... So you list... say Dyn as your DNS provider and you use Dyn, but if their servers go down or whatever because of an attack, they can automatically switch to a backup DNS provider.
Yeah, sure.
I think we'll see more options like that, or places actually listing publicly two different DNS providers. So that you're normally you list more than one DNS server. You have primary and backup or whatever, but usually they're the primary and backup of company A. You might actually see people starting to use company A and company B at the same time, and things like that. And so for that, I would recommend DNSMadeEasy.com. That's who I've been using for 15 years now for my DNS service, and they've had 100% uptime during it, even during denial of service attacks and so on.
Oh,
because they have over 1,000 name servers, and they use Anycast, and they can handle quite a few queries. And even when there is a DDoS against them, which has happened many times, it only affects some servers in one region, right? They absorb the attack close to the source, and then they have the other servers are still up.
I will write that. Yeah, I know you've mentioned it before. I'm going to write it down and take another look at them. That does sound like a good one. Especially after we just recently were taken down because our DNS was offline.
Yeah, with Hover. So, it can be complicated to have multiple companies doing it because they each want to provide their own control panel or something, and how do you synchronize the records? Although DNS Made Easy does specifically offer secondary DNS as a service. So if your primary will let you whitelist, let these IPs actually slave off of you, then you can actually just do it that way.
That's handy, Alan. All right, any other thoughts on this story?
Nope, that's about it for that.
All right, well, then I got some thoughts on IX Systems. In fact, I'd love it if you go to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP to support the show and learn more about their awesome servers powered by those incredible Intel processors. From your small business all the way up to massive enterprise deployments, they have got you covered. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. Some of the best buying experiences I've ever had have been with IX. The whole process can be really tedious, and so it's nice to work with a company that's thought about this for a long time. They've been in the business since before the dot-com boom and pop, and they really know how to do this right. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP also has a white paper where you can learn more. You can also head over to their blog to learn more about the company, and from time to time they blog about things that might be up your alley, like OpenZFS, which I don't know if we got a chance to cover this blog post on this show.
I don't think we did, no.
Yeah, they had so many other things they've been doing.
They sent 3 or 4 or 5 people to the OpenZFS Dev Summit, and Michael Dexter, friend of the show and mine, has written up a blog post for them about it, starting with day 0, where they actually, or maybe we have covered it. I remember you commenting about day 0 before. But we're starting with the social event the night before the conference, where they just met up and had food and drinks together. And then day 1 was all talks, all of which are on YouTube. I've watched a bunch of them. They're really good, especially if you're interested in the workings of it. The talk about native encryption in ZFS and how it actually works and how they worked around all the different problems. That talk is very good. One of the best 45 minutes I would recommend watching. And there was a bunch of other stuff as well.
Cool, Alan. So check them out. And
then day 2 was the hackathon, where all the people that are at the summit actually come together and work on like half-day projects of actually starting a new feature. And it has a list of some of the interesting ones, many of which you might end up seeing over the next years coming into new features in ZFS. They also had a little award thing. I think they give awards to the top 5 of the different ideas.
That's pretty nice.
Definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. There looks like those do look like, reading some of the feature highlights there, those do look like some, like they say, no-brainers.
The one Intel's working on is really interesting called, I think it's declustered RAID. The idea here is when a drive fails, it starts a resilver automatically by storing the extra data that would normally go to the replacement disk on the additional disks that are already available. So like if you have a 8-disk array and one disk dies, while you're waiting for a human to actually swap out the dead disk with a good one, you can actually start resilvering by putting the second copy of the data on some of the existing hard drives. Using up the empty space on your existing hard drives to get back to having less chance of more lost redundancy.
Yeah, that's so cool. And of course, IX Systems will be on the very edge of integrating that when it's ready and supporting it with their great support staff. IX has systems from the FreeNAS Mini all the way up to their big rigs with massive compute network storage. All of it. Check it out at ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. And thanks to IX for sponsoring this show and building such great systems. ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. What is a booter service, Alan? What is a booter
basically
service?
DDoS for hire. Is what they try to, they market it as that. It's basically, usually it's a slightly smaller DDoS for hire system. It's, enough to allow you to, if you get the IP address of your arch nemesis who's beating you in some video game, you can boot him off the internet by attacking him. Or
so it's the lazy man's DDoS.
Stressors, right? They're like, oh, you can stress your website and see if you can handle it. Except for you never do it to your website, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so these are mostly smaller DDoS for hire services. So there's been a lot of discussion about BCP 38, which is Best Common Practice 38. It's how we talk about RFCs, which are the request for comment that eventually gets turned into a standard. So BCP is more of these are the ways you should handle this particular type of thing, and it's a standard, but it's not, nobody's forced to do it necessarily. But what BCP 38 says is that the best common practice is to filter traffic leaving an ISP so that you block anything trying to leave that has an IP address that isn't from your NetBlock. So, if you're a home ISP or whatever, you don't want to let any traffic leave over your network that isn't from your network.
Right.
If it claims to be coming from over the competing ISP down the street, you want to block it because it's spoofed.
Are you blocking it? Or are you dropping it? What technically is happening?
Usually it's just dropping it.
Okay.
So basically it's dropping spoofed packets by having a rule that says if it's not from our known IP addresses, then we're going to drop it. And that we know that the only traffic leaving our network should be coming from inside of it. If it's leaving our network but claiming its actually source is over there, then that doesn't make sense.
So this is something we've talked about before, and it seems so obvious that I don't know if I've grasped why they don't do it. Yeah, okay.
Well, there are some complications. Like if, for example, you have, say, one of those Netflix caching devices at an ISP, well, it uses Netflix IPs to connect out. And so, there's a bunch of things you might accidentally break. Yes, it is manageable, but, basically there's no...
It takes time to figure it out.
They're just too lazy, right? There's not a big enough business reason to do it and too great of a chance of breaking something from doing it.
But it feels like there is a business reason. The business reason is your network isn't getting used and the bandwidth on your network isn't getting soaked up by script kiddies as booster services.
Yeah, I guess the bigger question...
Booter.
Yeah. So there's a couple of things here. First of all, as far as we're aware, the attack on Dyn and a bunch of other places weren't actually using DNS amplification. Well, in particular, the ones against Krebs, the 620 gigabit one, wasn't for sure. And so based on that, we're like, well, even if we implemented BCP38, it wouldn't have stopped the attack against Krebs based on all these IoT devices.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? Now, it would help with some other types of attacks, and we probably should still do that. There's no video of it, but the talk at the closing keynote of EuroBSDCon this year was talking about this and what some of the issues with doing it are, and so on. But you can definitely look into, if you want to know more about BCP38 and some reasons why it's not done, you can look into that.
Okay, cool.
But, in particular, a lot of the attacks we're seeing now are just pure volume attacks based on hundreds of thousands of these devices. And, if they can each send 2 megabits, then you can easily get huge numbers, right? However, most of these booter services are using reflection and amplification techniques because taking out a smaller website or an individual private game server, right? Like a lot of these are being used to take out Minecraft servers just because people are dicks. Doesn't require all that much resources, right? You don't need to manage a whole botnet to be able to do this. All you really need is like a single server, and it can send out an amount of traffic. You amplify that to make it bigger, and it's enough to take out some other single server.
Yeah.
Right? Or someone's home internet connection if you just want to kick a player out of a game. So these web-based DDoS for hire services don't bother running botnets. They generally employ a handful of powerful servers that are rented from some dodgy bulletproof hosting providers. Bulletproof in this case means they basically ignore abuse complaints and aren't going to shut your server down. They're also what's used for spamming and hosting botnets and all that kind of stuff. So they just find one of these places that's, the back alley of the internet and is willing to sell you whatever, rent a couple servers there and then use them to DDoS people or to use reflection and amplification to make it look like it's 1,000 bots attacking you when it's actually just all their one server sending out to reflectors that are then reflecting it back on the attacker, on the victim, making it look like there's actually more sources than there actually are. And maybe there's amplification in there allowing them, if I have 2 servers that each send 1 gigabit, but I amplify it by even 50%, all of a sudden now you're getting 4 gigabits and getting knocked offline.
Yeah.
So to find those vulnerable systems that can be leveraged in this way as reflectors and amplifiers, booters employ large-scale internet scanning services that constantly seek to refresh a list of systems that can be used for amplification and reflection attacks. They do this because research has shown that anywhere from 40 to 50% of the amplifiers will vanish or have a different IP address a week later. Because there are good guys out there also scanning, finding these reflectors and reporting them and complaining about them. I remember when the NTP-based ones were first happening, we saw a lot of this complaints from NeoNuke. I forget, a couple different places.
Yeah.
That were actually, one of the interesting ones is one of my ISPs was having trouble with the NTP built into the management controllers on their servers was misconfigured to allow the reflection stuff. So while everybody had installed the configuration update to stop the NTP on their server from being used in the attack, the one in the management controller, the second CPU in the server that most people don't think about, that one could still be used.
Yeah,
and most of those maybe were only 100 megabits, but some of them were actually linked to the onboard gigabit NIC and could send a gigabit of traffic. And you're like, I'm looking at the stats in my server. My server is not sending a gigabit of traffic right now, but the switch says it is. It's like, oh, right, there's actually a second MAC address built into that first NIC.
So do you think the other thing that could result to some of these guys disappearing so quickly, like after a week, if they're like these cameras and these IoT devices, a lot of them, when you reboot them or they power cycle, they reboot from a flash image that doesn't have the malware running. The malware gets wiped out, and then they get reinfected later. So that could also probably attribute to some of it as a
part of that, or just mostly I think it's that people aren't meaning to put up these amplifiers and reflectors. So anyway, so enter the researchers at Saarland University in Germany and Yokohama National University and the National Institute of Information and Communication Technologies in Japan.
All right.
In a year-long project that they started in 2015, the researchers looked for scanning that appeared to be kicked off by bad guys, or ne'er-do-wells, as Krebs likes to call them, running these booter services. So to accomplish this, the research team built a kind of distributed honeypot system, which they dubbed AmpPot as an amplifier, designed to mimic services known to be vulnerable to amplification attacks like DNS and NTP. So they set up honeypots that would pretend to be vulnerable DNS and NTP servers and watch for being scanned, right? So to make them attractive to attackers, their honeypots will send back legitimate responses. So they'll actually be amplifiers and look like that. So in their 2015 paper, they wrote that the attackers, in turn, will then abuse the honeypots as amplifiers to do attacks, which allows us to observe ongoing attacks, their victims, and the DDoS techniques. Mm-hmm. To prevent the honeypots actually damaging people during these attacks, they implement a rate limit so that while they're when they get the command and so on, they will actually be part of the attack, but they limit it to so small that it won't actually hurt anybody. But this allows the researchers running the honeypot to actually see who's being attacked and who's doing it, right? Mm-hmm. The way the reflectors attacks works, the source guy sends the thing to the reflector, and the reflector sends the attack to the victim. So the victim never knows who the attack's actually coming from because they just see the reflector. But if the reflector's a honeypot, they might actually get to see the IP of the source, where the attack is actually originating from, the IP address of these bulletproof servers.
Mm-hmm. This is a good way for doing research. Very handy.
Yeah. This way, the attackers can still find the rate-limited honeypots, but the honeypots don't actually hurt people. In that 2015 paper, the researchers said they had deployed 21 globally distributed AmpPot instances, which observed more than 1.5 million attacks between February and May of 2015. In analyzing the attacks more closely, they found that more than 96% of the attacks stemmed from a single source, like a booter service, rather than actually being distributed. Huh. So it wasn't a botnet using the amplifiers. It was like a single server, or a single bad guy running 2 or 3 servers as the source, and then using the amplifiers to take out somebody. Because it was enough to take out individual things, right? Obviously, it's not going to be enough to take out a Twitter, but it's enough to take out, your kid's Minecraft server.
Or your Skype call, or, whatever.
Exactly. To distinguish between scans performed by researchers and scans performed by the malicious, with a malicious intent, they relied on a simple assumption that no attack would be based on the results of a scan performed by an ethical researcher.
Okay.
So, in fact, thanks to our methodology, we don't actually have to make that distinction up front, but we can rather look at the results and say, we found attacks linked to this scanner and that scanner, but not this other scanner. Therefore, that scanner is malicious and that one is not. If a scan was truly performed by benign parties, there will be no attacks linked to it, and it'll be fine. What's new in the paper that they released this week by the students at Saarland University's Center for IT Security, Privacy, and Accountability.
Oh.
Interestingly called CISPA.
Yeah, very.
Yeah, Center for IT Security, Privacy, and Accountability. But their method, the researchers were able to link these mass scans to the very amplification attacks that followed later on. The researchers worked out a way to encode a secret identifier into the set of AmpPot honeypots that any subsequent attack will use. These vary per scan source, so that basically they would hash the incoming IP addresses And so that for each different scan source, they would list a different server as being vulnerable to the reflection attack. And then later, they would be able to tell, okay, this is the address they used trying to do the amplification attack. So we know that actually came from the scanner that has this IP address.
Okay.
Yeah, so they then test to see if the scanning infrastructure was also used to launch the attack or not.
Okay.
So they're looking to see, are the booter services running the scanner on the same machines that they actually run the attacks from?
That'd be a good little bit of data.
They used a combination of the hop count by just looking at the TTL remaining on the IP packets, trilateration, BGP path searching.
Trilateration, Alan?
Yeah, that's what GPS does to figure out your latitude.
Yeah, okay.
It's like, because they have all these AMP pots, the same scanner talks to all of them, and they can figure out where the scanner came from.
Yeah, that's what I thought that meant. That sounds pretty damn cool. That's some sophisticated analysis.
Yeah, so they're able to figure out which scanners were linked to which attacks. These methods revealed that there are so far 286 scanners that were used by booter services in preparation for launching amplification attacks. Further, they discovered that roughly 75% of those scanners are located in the U.S.
Interesting. You know, I was just thinking how much of this is going to be in the U.S. because so often you hear about pirated computers in China that are being used for botnets.
Right, but these aren't botnets. These are the actual machines that the attackers are using. Although, yes, often when you hear about bulletproof hosting, you kind of assume it has to be offshore.
Yeah, or I still think there's a lot of, I think if you ask the average people where do botnets run from, what groups control them, what machines are used, a lot of them would say China or another country. They wouldn't say, well, 75% of them would be in the United States.
Well, this is 75% of the scans, not the attack.
Right. No, I understand. Still.
But yes, machines in the U.S. As far as botnets go are worth more because they generally have slightly more bandwidth than, you can't launch a very big DDoS attack on the US from China because there's only so much bandwidth across the ocean there, right?
And I wonder how much the deployment of broadband matters. So how more likely, if broadband is more widely deployed, are you to have people that are scanning the internet and doing things that require a bit more bandwidth? You're probably more likely to do it in areas that have a higher penetration of broadband.
But yeah, so most of these scanners are probably running off dedicated servers and stuff rather than a hacked machine. Because they assume that the scanner is never going to be linked to the attack.
Right.
Because all it did was an unharmful
So you don't think some of these people are doing this from, say, like a sophisticated, like, say they got themselves a high-end workstation, they're developing this stuff, and they're running the scans from their ISP connection? Do you think that's probably not?
They maybe are doing that.
Okay.
But
I think it's mostly like rented servers or VPSs and...
Yeah. But in general, when you're doing the scan, that's something that's not against the rules. You're not hurting anything,
right?
And so in general, it never gets tied to the attack. But these researchers have developed a way where their honeypot will basically, I think they have I'm not sure exactly how they did it, but I imagine they have like a range of IP addresses, and depending on the source IP address of the scan, they make one of that range of IP addresses look like the vulnerable machine. So that a scan done by a different IP is going to show a different result. And then they know which one is actually used in the attack later, and they can tie it back. If they have a big enough IP address range, they can easily figure out, all right, the scan done by this IP address resulted in these hosts over here attacking or using our honeypot as a reflector to attack this site over here.
Okay.
And if you have the IP address of the scanner and of the machine that was actually sending the traffic, and you could tie that back to a specific booter service, you can say this booter service is what was used to attack this person over here. And again, it is almost as if, remember we were just talking in the previous story about having a stealth bot in the botnet to figure out what they're attacking. They're basically doing that by having stealth honeypots as reflectors to see what people are using the reflectors to attack. And again, they can figure, all right, this guy is actually the source of the attack on this person. Or we can know for sure it's like this booter service is what was used to attack that person. Just like that botnet was what was used to attack Dime.
It's very handy.
Although Krebs says, even if these newly described discovery methods were broadly deployed today, it's unlikely that booter services will go away anytime soon. But this research certainly holds the promise that booter service owners will be able to hide the true location of their operations less successfully going forward, and that perhaps more of them will be held accountable for their crimes.
Yeah, that is a nice win. That is, probably not going to go away.
The question is, how much of that is mitigated if the attackers figure out how it's done? In particular, if I just have my scanner randomly vary the starting TTL of the packets, then the hop counting goes out the window.
Damn it, Alan.
But most of these script kiddies maybe are not that sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be an arms race, isn't it?
But, at some point...
whenever there's money to be made or money to be saved. The problem is
the script kiddies generally are probably not developing this stuff themselves. They're buying it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's somebody who's...
If you could buy a DDoS script for a couple $1,000s and then use it to sell $600,000 worth of booter services, like VDOS did, then...
Now, the gal or guy who's making that initial script, they're the ones making the money because they gotta stay on top of it.
The script kiddies made the pile of money, but they're the ones that went to jail.
So at least to some regard, it seems like people are really wrapping their heads around how to narrow down where this is coming from. In a kind of a silver lining is even if they might figure out ways around it, at least for now, we might actually be able to hold a few people accountable, right? Which would be really nice. Well, that is pretty cool, Mr. Jude. Anything else you want to talk about on that guy?
No, that's about it for that.
What an interesting week. And there's still a dirty cow to get to. But first, let's talk about DigitalOcean. Use our promo code SNAPOcean. It's one word. It's all lowercase. You apply it to your account, you get a $10 credit. They're a simple cloud hosting provider dedicated to offering the most intuitive and easy way for you to spin up a cloud server. They have a great fast infrastructure, all SSD drives, 40 gigabit E-connections into the hypervisor. This is cooking with gas. And of course, just like Mr. Jude, you can deploy yourself a free BSD droplet. They also have CentOS, CoreOS, Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora. Their interface is really, really nice. It makes it easy to add your own SSH key, deploy multiple droplets at once, template, snapshot, backup, destroy, and transfer the droplets. It's pretty nice. And they've got data centers in New York, San Francisco, Singapore, Amsterdam, London, Toronto, and Germany, and in India as well, I believe. However, let's be honest. The only place you're going to want to have a droplet is in Toronto. You want that Alan Jude aura near your server, and that's how you get as close as possible. You combine that with their great interface, their super sweet API, and then they have a great staple of tutorials. I think that's what I'm going to call it. They just published one about setting up mod rewrite on Apache. They've got ones in here for FreeBSD. They've got ones in here for how to protect your server against the cow Linux vulnerability. I mean, they've got some great tutorials, and they keep making the service better and better. Not too long ago, they launched block storage, highly available data storage for data growth whenever you're going. Like for you're going cray-cray like I was a couple of weeks ago, I was experimenting with a server that was just writing a ton of data. You can add block storage as you need it from 1 gigabyte all the way up to 16 terabytes, all SSD backed. It's so nice. It's so nice if you're just experimenting or you got something big going. Plus, they've recently launched high memory droplets. And the pricing when you do it hourly is so nice. And when you want to go monthly, it's easy to understand and still a great value. DigitalOcean.com, just use our promo code SNAPOcean. If you need to get a little compute, basically anytime you need a computer that doesn't have a monitor, they do have an HTML5 console. Anything you want to try out, it's a new web app, something, it's so handy. DigitalOcean.com, and just use our promo code SNAPOcean. And a big thanks to DigitalOcean for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. So Dirty Cow's gotten a lot of attention. Ours calls it the most serious Linux privilege escalation ever. It's been in the wild for years. You ready to break it down?
Yes. They have a new vulnerability named Dirty Cow. If you pull up the site, it's got a nice graphic and everything. A race condition was found in the way that the Linux kernel memory subsystem handled the copy-on-write breakage of private read-only memory mappings. An unprivileged local user could use this flaw to gain write access to otherwise read-only memory mappings and thus increase their privilege on the system by changing bits of memory that are supposed to be read-only and changing something that they shouldn't have been able to change. While CVE 2016-91 or 5195 is cataloged amounts to a mere privilege escalation vulnerability rather than a more serious code execution vulnerability, there are several reasons many researchers are taking it extremely seriously. For one thing, it's not hard to develop exploits that work reliably. For another, the flaw is located in a section of the Linux kernel code that's part of virtually every distribution of the OS or open source OS released in the last decade.
Ouch.
So like every version of Linux is vulnerable.
I believe it's like the last 9 years, right? So it goes way back, which also, by the way, means every Android handset is vulnerable.
What's more, researchers have discovered that the attack code discovered attack code that indicates the vulnerability has been actively and maliciously exploited in the wild previously.
Oh.
The vulnerability is easily exploited with local access to a system, such as a shell account. But less trivially, any web server application may be vulnerable, which allows if the attacker is allowed to upload a file on the impacted system and then execute it. Lots of WordPress type vulnerabilities where you can modify a file or upload a file and then run it, and then it would be able to execute that, get root access, and do whatever it wants on the server, including open a backwards shell so the attacker can connect and have root on your machine. So all the typical ways of exploiting a website or whatever, where you're normally left as the unprivileged user of the web server, now can be escalated to have root access and take over the whole server.
Yeah, anytime an unprivileged local user can get higher up in the system, it only takes just the right conditions, and you can take advantage of that. It's not a big. That's bad. Yep. That's not a.
Well, normally you think local users like, oh, I don't have any local users on my server. The only users are me.
Yeah,
but it's like actually everything runs as a user. Yeah. And so, what makes the Dirty Cow bug unique? In fact, all the boring normal bugs are way more important just because there's a lot more of them. I don't think there's some spectacular security holes should be glorified or cared about any as being more special than a random spectacular crash due to bad logging or whatever. But this one is especially bad because it affects so many versions of Linux, basically. So then there's some questions about the in the wild stuff. Apparently, some people actually have HTTP captures of it being used against them. Although a lot of the details weren't being shared originally because they were waiting for people to get patched up first before.
Why did this all come out before most people were patched up?
Because it's being actively exploited in the wild, I think.
Oh, okay, all right.
So people need to know sooner rather than later.
Whew.
Let's see. Oh,
it's bad.
So this one I found especially funny. It's on the official dirtycow.ninja website.
Yeah.
I didn't write this. It says, what can be done to prevent this from happening in the future? They say, the security community, we included, meaning the people that made the site, must learn to find these inevitable human mistakes sooner. Please support the development effort of software you trust for your privacy. And then they provide a link, donate money to the FreeBSD project.
No, did you write that out?
I didn't do that. It's on the website. I didn't do it.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's like
the source for the website's on GitHub. You can find the commit where it was added. It was by the original person, not me.
That's as bad as when ButterFS said use ZFS. Just unbelievable.
Well, it's not Linus saying use previous.
No, I know, but gosh, that just hits you right in the soft spot. It's just a little salt in the wound. That's all. Just a little salt in the wound. So, Red Hat has an interesting quote here.
Okay. At the time of the public disclosure, the in the wild exploit that Red Hat was aware of did not work on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 and 6 out of the box because the exploit relied on one side of the race writing to proc self mem.
Yeah.
But proc self mem is not writable on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 and 6.
Right.
Now, they don't mention 7. Does that mean it was workable on 7?
I guess.
However, since the public disclosure, several proof of concepts have been published that use the ptrace method and do work on CentOS or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 and 6. So while the original one didn't have a flaw or wasn't out of the box exploitable on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 and 6, people have already developed ones that are.
I guess when I see this, I think to myself, the real issue is the long tail. Just recently, we covered a Google story that said that Linux vulnerabilities is usually in the wild for 5 years. Well, this one's 9. And the problem isn't that we don't get the new code written. The problem is that nobody gets it deployed.
This one, it wasn't. I don't know if the bug existed for 9 years. I don't know that there was an exploit sitting around for it for all 9 of those years.
Sure. Okay. But I guess what my point is not the problem doesn't seem to be that the code gets written to fix it. That always seems to happen. The problem is that the code doesn't get deployed to many
wasn't
many
a fix
places.
for this one it's not like there was a fix for this one for 9 years.
No, I understand.
But the question is, now that we have a patch, how long before
That's my point.
Just 90% of people have the patch?
That's my point. We just had a study that just came out that just said it's 5 years, but according to a Google engineer, it's 5 years is the average.
Part of it is because if you're looking at routers running Linux 2.6 kernels, although they might be old, they might be old enough not to have the vulnerability. How far back does this go? Do you know version wise?
I did, but I don't have it handy anymore.
Okay, but the problem is that when it's these IoT type devices or even pre-IoT appliance type devices like routers that don't get firmware updates, then literally the only way for the vulnerability to go away is when people throw that router away and replace it with a new one.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's why it takes 5 years, because that's like the hardware refresh cycle, basically, on these appliances.
Kernel 2.6.22, released in 2007. The fix was released on October 18th, 2016.
So that one's kind of right on the border, I guess.
Yeah.
Being vulnerable.
Yeah. There's 2.6 is...
Some appliances might be just old enough to be 2.6.18.
Yeah.
But yeah.
This might be the time where you want an older one. That's hilarious, Alan. Oh my gosh. So Dirty Cow seems to be. I've also been seeing a lot of coverage in the context of mobile. That seems to be a big part of it. Is the mobile devices that are now affected by this. Yeah, but I guess the issue is we are going to constantly be finding problems like this that have been around for a long time. And it feels like if we don't solve the overall patching problem, which I know this is a soapbox of mine, but if we don't solve this problem, then it doesn't matter if we fix it. And we just keep coming in. I mean, there's probably machines out there still that have the bash vulnerabilities and the OpenSSL vulnerabilities and et cetera, et cetera. It's
I don't know if somebody did the looking. Well, for the OpenSSL one, it's a little less bad when it's on the client side because you have to actually connect to a bad guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true.
So that's the saving grace of all these 2.6 Linux routers and so on is most of them didn't bother with SSL because the processor was too small to generate a certificate in a reasonable amount of time.
Well, so is there any other shots you want to take at Dirty Cow before we move on?
No, I don't want to beat the dead cow.
Oh, I feel like it's beating itself right now. You know what? We all need to get our spirits lifted by visiting Ting. Go to techsnap.ting.com to land on a page that supports us and gets you $25 off your first Ting device or $25 in service credits. Now, Ting is mobile that's so simple and straightforward that usually you're only going to pay like $23 for a monthly bill with a device on it. $6 for the line, and then you just pay for what you use with your minutes, your messages, and your megabytes. There's no contract. There's no early termination fee, and they have incredibly good customer support, and they have a great control panel. I've been a Ting customer now. When January gets there, I think it'll be 3 years. And I think I've probably used customer support really just once, and I was very, very impressed. But the thing that I really like about Ting is they've continued to get better and iterate on all of their features and add new ones, like their dashboard. It's really nice. They got apps. They got the web page. It all works on your mobile, all that good stuff. It really is a great tool, and it has all your stuff just listed right there. But I'll tell you, I also like a lot of the things they've done since I've become a customer, like the adding of GSM, so they have GSM and CDMA services. The doubling down on those of us who are cord cutter, the rollout of their fiber internet service, and the reduction of their data prices. Speaking of getting a good deal, they just posted on the 24th. This is probably the blog post I've been waiting for a long time. 5 inexpensive smartphones with flagship level performance. They go in here, they talk about the cameras, they talk about the updates, they give you your different options with different price points. I think it's a great post if you want to get a nice value phone that still has good performance. You want to put it on a cellular network that gives you CDMA, GSM. You only pay for what you use, no contract, no early termination fee. And if you got a device you think might work with Ting, go check out their BYOD page and then grab a $9 SIM. And then you'll get a $25 service credit. Or go pick up a device. Look at this. They got the new Blue Studio C for $74. No contract. Unlocked. You own it outright. That's so nice. TechSNAP.ting.com. And a big thank you to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And also just a Ting pro tip. You can call them, or you can go to their website and click this "How much would you save?" and give that a go and see what Ting can do for you. TechSNAP.ting.com. I woke up early this morning to a brand new episode of the BSD Now program. The beard must have been editing all night, and episode 165 is out. Vote for BSD. This looks like a slightly shorter episode than last week's. Oh, wait, was last week's the Brian Cottrell episode, or is that?
Yes, that's why.
Okay, yeah. So what's going on in this episode 165, Mr. Jude?
Lots of stuff. Vulnerability in Beehive. Well, I don't remember. It was yesterday.
That was yesterday, yeah.
Somebody should just read the tweet somebody sent about it.
Okay, okay, well, I'll tell you what it had. It had Windows 10 under Beehive. That sounds pretty good.
Tutorial for that.
An update about Lumina 1.10. That sounds nice.
1.10.
Okay, sure.
How to a tutorial on creating your first kernel module.
Damn, yeah.
An article about CTL or CAM target layer, which is kind of related to iSCSI. And basically, this article is how you could take a shelf of disks like you would buy from IX and 2 head controller machines connected to that one set of disks and do high availability so that you can actually reboot one of them, or one of them can crash, but yet your VMs and your file server stuff continues to run off of the other one.
Geez, that sounds like that would answer
cool stuff.
A lot of questions we've gotten. Nice. So that sounds like a great episode. Check it out, episode 165 of the BSD Now program. And you can go get it in HD, so that way, just as we're wrapping up here.
Oh, yes. The vote title doesn't have anything to do with the U.S. election. It has to do with the ARIN election, the American Registry of Internet Numbers.
See, and find out more by getting that episode. Just as we wrap up, you can go watch more, get more information. Don't stop now. We're about the halfway point, so it'll be a good time to go get it at jupiterbroadcasting.com. But with the news all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or popping that contact link up at the top of the JB website, or maybe starting a thread and our subreddit at techsnap.reddit.com. And Alan Will writes in with our first email this week. He wants to know about admin from the WAN side on these routers. In the discussion of the attack on Krebs' site, one of the types of devices listed as being used is routers. Are routers typically pre-configured with their default account and password to get accessed from the WAN side? I would have thought that it would have been sufficient to allow that just from the LAN side. It basically is asking, how are all these little devices getting compromised? It's not like they're allowing WAN logins.
Right. Well, it depends. There's quite a few different things. It also depends what you mean by router as well. So the little home router type devices, which are really just NAT gateways, actually have a differentiation between a WAN side and a LAN side. And most of them have the option of enabling the WAN side, but it's off by default. Some of the cheaper Chinese ones maybe have that on. Now, other types of routers, especially more higher end like Cisco's and so on, often have, they don't really have the concept of a WAN side versus a LAN side. They just have a bunch of ports that you could plug anything into. And people enable Telnet, and it's less of a thing right now, but going back a couple of years, there were a lot of DDoS attacks that were launched by just thousands of regular Cisco, like high-end Cisco routers that people logged into over Telnet with the default username and password, to the point that one of our groups that was being attacked would go around scanning for these Ciscos, log into them, and change the default password so they wouldn't be able to be used against us in the future.
Oh, sorry. Hello. Alan, that sounds kind of fun.
But in particular, like a lot of the devices being used in this recent one were those the webcam and DVRs, which had Telnet enabled by default. And even if you went in the web interface, there was no way to turn Telnet off, or even any way to know that Telnet was there if you didn't just try and connect to it and find it was there. And changing passwords in the web interface didn't affect the passwords for Telnet, which it turns out on those specifically those Xiaomi ones, you cannot actually change the password. It's not possible. You'd have to reflash the device with an image that just happened to have a different password. You can't change the password on them at all. So it's not so much that people aren't changing the default password. Even if they did in the web interface, the device is still vulnerable because there's a hard-coded default password for root over Telnet that you can't turn off.
Man, and you combine that with things like universal plug and play that can automatically forward ports, and you combine also, it doesn't take that much work. We've covered in stories.
If you have one of those web security cameras, they're purposely making it so that you can connect to it from your cell phone while on the road.
We've also covered stories in the past where, like through a browser infection or a phishing link in your email, you compromise a computer on the LAN.
About the link you could get in your email that would actually be an image. So that it wasn't even a link. You didn't have to click on it. You tried to load the image. And it would actually connect your router and change your DNS servers on your router to point to bad ones that would hijack your Google traffic.
This is a thing that's been happening more and more as more I think, this is my theory, I think as consumers move over to phones and tablets for some of their computing and they're not on Windows desktops as much, attackers have to kind of pivot to a different attack surface, a different vulnerability, a different thing to take advantage of. And if they can get your router and they get you looking at their DNS servers, and they can monitor where you're going, they can inject ads. That can affect an iOS device, an Android device, a Windows PC, a Mac. So you get all the machines, you get everybody on the LAN. I mean, it's really got to be, I would think, a huge incentive for them. And because of the security in these boxes is so crappy, the fruit hangs low, Will. I think that's what's going on. All right, so John writes in, and he wants to know how to secure the Internet of Terrible Things. I'm writing you about a current issue, Internet of Things and DDoSes. As an end user, how do I secure my Internet of Things devices from getting hacked besides not buying one? Namely, from the network point of view, because I can't control that. I can't control the software running on these devices. When an IoT device gets owned, what can be done so the IoT device cannot be part of any kind of DDoS attack? From a network point of view, of course. He says, I see two scenarios. One where a user has a state-of-the-art firewall, pfSense. Second, where the user has one cheap off-the-shelf router. Is there any way to set up my network so the Internet of Things web camera and the IoT thermometer can be limited, that they cannot be part of any malicious network activity? Thanks for any helpful information, John.
Yeah. So the biggest one is if you can make it so that the internet cannot connect to your device from outside, that will help most of it, right? So your IoT webcam or like, security camera, generally you kind of want to expose it to the internet so that you can check on it from home or from outside on your phone or whatever and see what's going on. But if you can manage to not do that, then you can make it so if nobody can reach it from the internet, then they can't infect it. So maybe you have to resort to doing something like an SSH channel or a VPN in order to then connect your LAN on your phone and then be able to open up the camera. For the thermometer, there's no reason your thermometer ever needs to connect to the internet, and you could use your firewall to just block it entirely, possibly. So doing that with pfSense is relatively easy. You can create rules that, for the MAC address of the thermometer, don't ever allow it to use the internet, and it will follow its IP as it moves around in DHCP. Or you can create a DHCP reservation so your thermometer always gets the same IP address, and then have your router block that IP address from using the internet. With your off-the-shelf router, that's probably a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, so Jake in the chat room says more people should do VPNs and then have a route from the VPN to an Internet of Things VLAN without WAN access. And Noah kind of does...
your off-the-shelf stuff probably, most people...
Doesn't let you set VLAN tags, probably.
Right. Well, in particular, the switches built into your little off-the-shelf router maybe doesn't support VLANs, and most people don't have a dedicated managed switch,
It might be reasonable to just say this cheapo switch, like I was just on Newegg this morning and saw a 6-port gigabit unmanaged switch for, I don't know, it was like $55 or something. This cheap, crappy switch is the Internet of Things network. And
the bigger one is, most of the time, almost all your IoT stuff is probably connecting over wireless.
So I was just going to say, so throw an AP in that network too.
Yeah. So have a second AP or whatever, and a different subnet, and maybe don't allow it out. Or with a pfSense, you could actually rate limit it. You allow it to have access to the internet, but you can't do more than a megabit a second or something.
Or you can only talk to the Philips Hue control server or something like that.
Right. Or just your traffic is limited to this trickle so that you can't actually hurt anybody with DDoS.
I like the idea of putting a Wi-Fi network in the Internet of Things network, because a lot of these Internet of Things devices are managed from phones, and you have to connect to, you probably have to connect your phone to that Wi-Fi network anyway, so you'd probably have to have wireless in the mix. So just do it right, and maybe just do it on its own physically isolated network, because you're never going to get better than that. So that's something to consider, John. All right, so...
there's some... Because, the other problem is that some of those try to help you. So... a bunch of those, like, for example, there was the Chinese IoT device. You plug it into the socket, and then you plug a lamp into it, and then you can turn the lamp on and off from your phone.
Yeah.
And so that one, to avoid making you have to open a port or something, the way it works is the device connects out to a server in China.
Yeah.
And then your phone connects there.
Yep.
And then that server controls your ability
Yep.
to send commands to that switch.
Yeah.
Except for they did it by, the only authentication was you basically knowing the MAC address of the switch, the device at your house. So it meant somebody else who knew how this device worked could just send a command to that server and just iterate every possible MAC address in the range assigned to this company and turn off everybody's lights.
Jeez.
So they can also have other problems, but it's less likely that somebody will be able to take over the device that way.
Yeah. I would say if you're really seriously worried about the end of the day, its own separate physical network that doesn't have any connection to the outside world, and you're fine. Yep. And then you can iterate on that to your level of comfort. Okay,
yeah,
so
it's much harder to do without something like a pfSense where you actually have some control there.
Yeah, and if you got an old crappy piece of hardware, look to see if there's an alternative firmware you could put on it, perhaps.
Well, so OpenWRT or something, or DDWRT or something like that on your cheap device might help a lot too. Some of them you can manage to actually deal with the second subnet, but you have to add a bunch of static routes, and it's a lot of headache. And if you don't understand how to do it, it's rather difficult.
All right. Mike writes in and wanted advanced advice on Windows security. Hello, Chris and Alan. My grandfather was recently hit by ransomware on his Windows machine. He's asked me to help assist him in securing his Windows machine to ensure something like this doesn't happen again. Since I'm a Linux user, I'm not sure what's the best solution for this problem. I'm aware that there are many different ways he can defend against these attacks, such as safe browsing habits, awareness of scams and their behaviors, and of course backing up data. I would like your advice on antivirus vendors, or more specifically, antivirus software that we would need to run to protect his PC. I know in the past you guys have covered some really dodgy AV vendors, so I want to avoid those ones. Thanks. Mike, what are your thoughts on this, especially when you're going to have the end user not be super sophisticated?
Your biggest problem there is that all the antiviruses are reactive, right? They can only deal with the ransomware once they know what it is. So if you're one of the first people hit by it, it doesn't help you at all.
Yeah, I would say there are some advantages to using things like uBlock or AdBlock, because they will block some domains that are known to have generally malware or malvertising
and
in general.
Some user behavior stuff to help defend against it. Your biggest one though is get the backups.
Yeah,
if you have the backups, then you can just restore after.
Make that bulletproof, so he doesn't even have to mess with it. Don't even rely on him swapping physical stuff. That's not going to work. Also, make sure he's not running with administrative privileges. There's no reason to do that on most Windows PCs, and that can so dramatically limit the damage. And make sure UAC is turned on as well. I don't care if it's a pain in the butt. These things have been built into Windows for a reason. I absolutely recommend that.
Basically, the UAC, even when it's popping up all the time and bothering you, it's still working, because if it pops up suddenly when you didn't do something to make it, then you know that's suspicious, right? When I get a pop-up after I try to launch an application, I know, okay, I tried to launch that, and so yes. Yeah. But if I get one in the middle of just looking at a website, I'm like, I didn't do that. That's die in a fire.
I honestly would also, if you're gonna put a gun in my head, I honestly would say ESET still. I still like ESET's antivirus products. I'm the last person to ask about that, because not only do I primarily run Linux, but when I ever do run Windows, I never install antivirus.
I've never. The last time I had an antivirus was 1998. I had McAfee Bomb Shelter that would actually let you recover from Windows 95 blue screen of deaths, or Windows 98 blue screen of death.
Wow. I wonder what kind of memory manipulation it's doing to pull that off. Right?
I don't know. That's what it said on the box.
So how many times do you get viruses, Alan?
Me? I think there was one time ever at a LAN party where somebody's computer had got infected, and it infected the patch file for a video game. And it's like, oh, don't download that over. We had slow internet at the time. Or actually, no, we were having this one at the lawn bowling pavilion building.
Okay.
And so we had no internet at all. So Wes had a patch for this game, and so I copied it over the LAN instead of, getting a copy from an authoritative source. And then I was playing the game, and I was like, how come every time I'm holding down the W key, my hard drive is going crazy?
Uh-oh.
I'll open it up and find it installed some kind of keylogger, and it was trying to log all the things I was doing playing Battlefield 1942. So I quickly found the problem and killed it and cleaned up my machine. But that was the last time. That was like 2002.
Yeah. So obviously antivirus might help, and ESET is kind of my favorite, so it's worth looking at. But Mike, if you just got him running with a regular user account and get him on Chrome or Firefox. Make sure he's not on Internet Explorer. Put uBlock Origin on that, and maybe consider using EasyDNS. You'd probably get really close
to OpenDNS.
Yes, right. Thank you. OpenDNS. And then, like Alan said too, make sure those backups are just totally bulletproof.
Yeah, you want backups, and you want to make sure your backups have, not just a copy of all your files, because if the backup's running when it starts crypto lockering you, then you end up backing up the encrypted version, and then you're hosed, right?
What about playing around with like Clonezilla too, just for like belt and suspenders? So that way, not only do you have the data, but you have the base OS with the applications configured.
Clonezilla will allow you to have an easier point to restore from.
Yeah.
So maybe get the machine working, get them happy with it, Clonezilla that, so that you have something to bootstrap from, and then you have your regular, whatever kind of
nightly backups or weekend backups or whatever. Yeah.
TechSNAP is good, although it's a little dodgy on Windows. So, or rather, because it's command line, it's a little harder to set up on Windows. But
yeah, TechSNAP would be a little harder.
Yeah, but some kind of
Backblaze on Windows.
What was that other one you liked? The Crash Plan?
Crash Plan, yeah. I think I might go Backblaze these days, but yeah.
Yeah, and then that way you can bootstrap from the Clonezilla and then restore, your daily backups or whatever from your other thing.
Yeah. And that would probably mean that if something happens again, your total time investment's at least cut in half, if not more. So that could be really nice, too. All right, Mike, thank you. Now, if you didn't hear your email answered or read on this show, there's a good chance we're going to read it next week, because we're doubling up. So thank you. Keep sending them in, though, because now we need more. So go over to the Jupiter Broadcasting page and click Contact. We have a few more for next week, but then we're all out. And we have a nice open inbox for your emails to flood in and get answered right here on the show. So go to the contact page, choose TechSNAP from the dropdown, and send your questions in. But with our emails all done for this episode, it means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that just didn't fit at the top of the show, but we still want to give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. Some of these links came from our intelligence network over at techsnap.reddit.com. Our first one, though, came from Mr. WWNSX in our chat room while we were recording. Adobe is launching an emergency Flash bulletin for Flash. I guess there's some active malware exploitation happening, and so they want everybody to update ASAP. Mm-hmm. Flash Player getting an update. It's CVE 2016-7855. The use after free programming blunder, apparently. Yeah, this just broke as we were recording the last segment, Alan. Yep. So there you go. There's some late breaking news in the roundup.
They have a version number there. Make sure you're running 23.0. What's it say?
Oh, I don't know. I just noticed the CVE number.
A little bit further down. It's 23.0.
Yep. 23.0.0.205.
Yeah, make sure you have at least that version or newer.
And for Linux, you need 11.2.202.643.
Yes, someday they will actually have. They said they were going to make a 23 for Linux. But
they do a lot of things, though, don't they? They say a lot of things, and they don't necessarily do all of them.
Well, they said they were killing it off and did, and now they're saying we might actually. It turns out Linux has still got enough market share. We might actually do a new version.
So everybody go update. Go update. Because, yes, still have Flash out there. So it's nearly 27.
Speaking of updates.
Yeah. Apparently, JPEGs and PDFs and font files can still hijack your Apple Mac, an iPhone, or an iPad. That doesn't sound very good, Alan. Is this getting patched?
Yes. So you need to have iOS 10.1 or newer, and it addresses 12 CVEs, one of which is viewing a maliciously crafted JPEG file may lead to arbitrary code execution. So opening a JPEG. So this is the one we've always talked about. It's like opening a JPEG. It's safe, right?
See, this is always.
It's not like they just could embed a virus in a JPEG. So basically, you could make one of these specialty JPEGs and tweet it. Now, probably Twitter would resize the JPEG.
Send it in an email. Send it over iMessage.
But yes, basically you could MMS people this JPEG and root their phone.
Here's what bugs me, though, is the only thing I'm seeing from Apple is a fix for Sierra. What about
iOS? The link I have, the next link, is the patch bulletin for iOS 10.1, which fixes it on the iOS devices.
Right, but on the Mac side, it appears they're only fixing the absolute latest version.
Well, yeah, they only support the latest version.
But that version just came out like 2 weeks ago. Like, how can you not?
How come you haven't updated yet? You're an Apple fanboy, right?
Oh yeah. I've got to run it on all these Macs. Yeah. All these Macs in the studio.
You mean Sierra that without some updates would crash if you tried to access NFS, right?
Yeah. Yep. That one. That's the one. It just seems like again the middle finger to pro customers, because pro customers aren't jumping on every release that comes out.
Even in FreeBSD, where you don't pay us for any support, we support the old version for 3 months after the release of the new version to give you a reasonable window to upgrade.
Okay, so it looks like, according to Apple, if you're on an older version of macOS, they're going to provide some WebKit updates. So you have to go get Safari 10.0.1 if you're on an older version, which is available for Yosemite, El Cap, and Sierra. So
sure, but that only affects your web browser. What about other programs that process JPEGs?
Yeah.
What about looking at JPEGs on your hard drive? Now, maybe that's not as big of an attack vector, but...
Yeah. What if you use QuickView to view a JPEG from Finder? Or what if you open up an email and does Mail use that version of Safari you download? I would like somebody who might have a little more information on how macOS works in that regard to let us know. So this seems like kind of a big deal. Boy, the register is killing it for the roundup today. Every LTE call, text, etc. can be intercepted, blacked out, according to at least this hacker at a presentation. Ruxicon. Is that how you think you say it? Ruxicon?
It's just Ruxcon.
Oh, man, I liked mine. Yeah, you're right. Anyways, that's where this talk was given at, and where they say that holes were blown in 4G LTE networks by detailing how to intercept and make calls and send text messages and sex. Even force the phones offline altogether. Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all.
I could just target your cell phone and make it not able to use LTE.
That's a hell of a DDoS, though.
Root you off the network.
They've actually done some real nice digging here, too.
Yeah.
Can create a denial of service attack against cell phones by forcing phones to go into fake networks with no services. This feels like something law enforcement would take advantage of, too, somehow.
Yep. You could isolate somebody's cell phone so that they couldn't, call and warn people that the police are coming and so on.
We got ourselves a Debian security advisory for CVE 2016-1247, right?
So this one's interesting. So this is a flaw that didn't exist in Nginx, but was added when Debian packaged Nginx the Debian way instead of the Nginx way.
Oh, what did they do?
But they introduced a problem with the log rotation that would allow privilege escalation.
Oh, I see. The security update changes the ownership of varlog Nginx directory root to root. In addition, varlog Nginx has been made accessible to local users, and local users may be able to read the log files themselves. Oh, okay. Until the next log rotate invocation. Interesting. Yeah. So they messed around with the log permissions, it looks like.
Yeah, and caused problems for Nginx. It's like, this didn't exist in Nginx, but they added the vulnerability when they were backporting patches and so on.
This next one is disappointing to see, but not unexpected. Google has quietly dropped the ban on personally identifiable web tracking data that they committed to when they picked up DoubleClick back in 2007. They said it was going to be one of their commitments, but now that got really inconvenient. So they've dropped a line that said, "We will not combine DoubleClick cookie information with personally identifiable information unless we have your opt-in consent." That's gone now. So I guess not too unexpected that if they get the sea of data, of course they're going to combine it. They've already been dropping that stuff, those distinctions between their other services too, but it gives Google a lot of insight because those DoubleClick cookies are in a lot of websites. That was a big buy for them.
Yep.
Rowhammer. No, it's not a James Bond villain. Apparently it lets you bitflip to root.
We talked about Rowhammer before, where basically memory in RAM is laid out in rows, and if you hammer on a specific spot, you can cause the spots near it to bitflip. And you could potentially use that to take over a machine if you crafted it just right. And it was very theoretical. But now these guys have actually got it working on an Android phone to root the phone.
Okay, not too surprising. It looks like they're able to do phones from LG, Samsung, and Motorola, and also some of the Nexus phones, but not all of them.
An app with no permissions, hammer on the RAM for a while, and then root the phone.
Yeah. So Nexus 4, Nexus 5, the LG G4.
This attack is basically against the hardware. So what OS you run on it doesn't really matter.
No, my point is these are the ones they've tested it on. And so what the researchers have also done, do this if you want, but they've released their own Android app that you can sideload and then test your hardware and become part of their data set to try the different ARM chips and their memory management and see what breaks. It's kind of a neat idea, although kind of creepy too, to sideload something like that. But I guess they were trying to get it in the Play Store, and Google hasn't turned it live yet. We'll see if that actually happens. I don't know. So what's have you seen this? Because I actually think I tossed this in here, and I wasn't sure if you had a chance to see this one. It looks like
a little bit.
Yeah. So it looks like there's a path name bypass flaw for tar. Is that right?
So they did a nice job with this one. This is from F-Secure, and they made it look like a Snowden document, right? So there's like CSS pointy feathers, tar extract path name bypass CV 2016-6321. But it's like vulnerability, pointy feather. And then they have the credits and the date, impact file overwrite in certain situations. But then it's like Nordic eyes only, no foreign, public, exploit global. Threat level manatee.
Nice. Good callback.
It's in this time when 0 days are hoarded in exchange for local currencies in different parts of the world, F-Secure's CSS is going old school and dropping a not so valuable vulnerability for free, as in beer. They found a problem where GNU tar will happily extract files and directories into an arbitrary location when supplied with a suitably crafted archive file. If a target system is extracting an attacker-supplied file, the vulnerability can be exploited to gain file overwrite capabilities. When having exploited this vulnerability in an environment where tar was run as root to gain root access on the target, in most scenarios, this is a non-issue. However, as we have witnessed corner cases, it can be quite useful. After communicating with different parties, it was discontinued for more than 42 days. The discussion was made to proceed with our honorable disclosure policy.
Okay. Oh, tar.
Yep.
Oh, tar.
So yeah, an attacker can create a specially crafted tar archive file. If extracted by the victim, will replace files and directories the victim has access to in the target directory, regardless of the path name specified on the command line. So you tell tar, hey, extract the files over here, and it overwrites files in your current directory, even though you didn't tell it.
Okay. So why don't we end the roundup on a birthday? No, not Hillary's. The birthday of the Bug Bounty, which just celebrated his 21st birthday. You can drink now.
Yes. So as far as is known, Netscape. Netscape was the first company to have a Bug Bounty program for Netscape Navigator, which eventually became Firefox, and that was 21 years ago today.
Wow. Kind of cool that it was Netscape Navigator 2.0 beta that was maybe, from what we can tell, the first Bug Bounty. That's kind of awesome that it was Netscape.
Yep.
There you go. Happy birthday to the Bug Bounty. All right, that brings us to the end of episode 290 of the TechSNAP program. If you want to get a story in our roundup, go to techsnap.reddit.com. If you want to get a question into our feedback, go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact. And I encourage you to check our live counter, because not only are we going to be live next week, but there will be some changes coming up to accommodate for Meet BSD. So stay apprised of all of it at jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, where the lifetime also gets converted to your local time, and then you plug in jblive.tv to your browser of choice, and boom, you're watching Alan and Chris do the show live with all of the itty-bitty bits between the segments, which is sometimes the best stuff. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. Thanks for tuning in this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.